Hey there. Oh, yeah, there we go again. I always seem to point it right down in a stupid location. So, if you've been following, I've been playing Clash of Monarchs. It's a GMT game, not a GDW game. Opening it up, the components are kind of pretty. You know, I mean, GMT puts out nice quality stuff. I had some complaints about the way the map, it's kind of hard to see what's going on. I especially had trouble with the rivers, these grayish lines here. They're more visible than anything else. They have an effect on play, but maybe, I don't know, they seem to divide things up into what look like the provinces, and then they aren't. And that's just a minor gripe about that. But overall, I'm pretty impressed with what I've seen. Again, component-wise, let's go through that first. Got 4 of these. It's a 4-player game. 4 sets of little folders of information. Personally, I think you can get away with 2 in a 4-player game and share them. Especially since they only printed 1 copy, and that's fine, of the event table. And they're much worse from my point of view. There's only 1 copy of the sequence of play. Now, luckily, online, there's a copy of the living rules, and I printed off a more recent sequence of play that has some changes on it anyhow. There's also only 1 copy of the diplomacy chart, which I think is fine, to tell you the truth. Each player has one of these little power display things, which are kind of pretty. They have a picture of the leader, and what I think is really cute, the cards have the same pictures on them. France, no, France and Russia. Oh no, that's Louis and Elizabeth. Not, I thought it was Louis and Madame Pompadour, which was, I thought, pretty silly, but no. So France and Russia share a deck, and they are played by 1 person. One of my complaints about the decks of cards is they're kind of small, and that makes it tricky to shuffle them, actually. I don't know if you've ever been used to shuffling very small decks of cards, but it is not the easiest thing in the world. As usual, GMT gives you these little baggies. And you know, if you're not going to put a counter tray in a game, and actually I usually pull the counter trays out because I'd rather have things in baggies, I think this is a really great, cheap little alternative. So let's go to the game itself. And here I unpacked everything. Let me look at the rules and give you kind of what I think is cool and what is not about it from it. Well, first of all, it's a 4-player game, but it really is 2-sided. There's no real diplomacy in it, even if even if the 2 players on the same side aren't necessarily working completely in conjunction. Kind of like with for Third Reich, where players can be kind of competing for points, but they have a certain goal at the end. In this case, the goal at the end is to have collectively more points than your opposing pair. So, at the beginning of each year, you go through some sort of financial and production type stuff. And this is the only, unlike a lot of CDGs, this is the only time you can really produce. There's some cards that will give you extra troops. But this is your main production in the turn. You don't have the, let me exchange this for 4 more troop counters because I really need them right now. You don't have anything like that at all. You also don't really control your production completely. You control it off, and I love this. There's this recruitment table, and you get to choose kind of how many dice you want to roll on it, and the higher your result, the more troops you get, and the more you pay. And if you don't have enough troops, you still have to pay. You don't know how much money it's going to cost you to raise troops, and you don't know what you're going to get. And that's, I think, a really, really cool mechanism. Let me see what else. Okay. So now, after that, you go to the draw phase in each summer and fall turn. And essentially you get a pile of cards. You have a hand limit. Your fatigue can affect that. At the same time, now the cards are your basic CDG cards. They have an ops value to them, and then they have an event associated with them. And you have the choice. You can play the operations or you can play the event. Operations are more limited, though, in this game than in a lot of them. It's not... So, in something like Here I Stand, you have this huge range of operations. In this, you really have 4 things you can do. I'm sorry. 3. Now, basically 4. You can use it to move stuff on the board. And that's pretty cool. And that's one command. There's some events, and a lot of events, that allow you to do multiple commands. You can use it to trigger the Kleiner Krieg, which is this really cool kind of sub-game. When you got nothing better to do, if you've got light troops on the board, you can gain some advantages that way. You can also hinder your opponent if you wish. Both are good options. Britain and France can play colonial options, but they have a limit. They can only play 1 card per season. And Britain and France, if they have an armistice, and we didn't see this at all in my game, they can reduce the size of that armistice. There's something else you can do with them. Instead of playing them at that point, you can also play them to gain supply points. And this is valuable because supply points have a whole bunch of different reasons you'd need them. Among others, maintaining supply units. You can either use cash or you can use supply points for it. But also moving the supply units around, restoring supply to your units, whatever. You also get supplies when you do raids. So if you're raiding someone else, you get bonus points in your supply track. Which means you don't really... Usually you don't need to play these cards. Early in the game you may need to get them to get some supplies up. But after the game kind of starts, you don't need that. So, on every round, and I missed a few, you draw a chit for Fortunes of War. And these are the real events. Not only there's a set of chits that do things, so they might trigger the Kleiner Krieg, or they might trigger some attrition or something. But on top of that, some of them will fire you off. To that one extra list. This chart gives you there's 2 different tables that can give you Fortunes of War. Well, there's Fortunes of War. I can give you the Deus Ex Machina, and you can also get to a death table, and all of these have different effects and are affected through time. This is a really nice mechanism. It takes the events that a player shouldn't control out of their hands, and I have to applaud the designer for this, on top of his knowledge of the era, which is very obvious with the game. Then you have an additional set of tables, effects of Halley's Comet, which kind of flips the movement order in the game, among other things, and some diplomatic tables, which can be triggered, usually by cards. Now, this isn't clear in the game how they're triggered until you get to the cards, and this is one of the kind of gripes I have about the rulebook, is it's missing key pieces of information. You really do have to kind of read the card deck, I think, before you play, which of course I didn't do because I like to be shocked. Okay. And you have this diplomacy chart. This is something else that happens in the winter. Historical options are always column A, but you have some slightly different options that you can take. So for example, with France, instead of attacking into Hanover, you can move against Prussia directly. Or you can try to focus on the overseas side. And each of these have a whole series of different little effects. I don't know if they're all correctly written. I have some suspicion that maybe the game requires a little tweaking with those diplomatic tables. And that's done, again, during the winter-spring interphase. It's actually done in the winter at the end of the turn. I just popped that off out of nowhere. Okay, so then the player order is determined. It's fixed based on Halley's Comet. And each player's turn, they do a supply segment where they can kind of try to keep their get their units back into supply. I didn't see a lot of units falling out of supply because it's kind of bad to be out of supply. I mean, you fight worse and you can't do a lot of things. Then you hit the strategy card segment where you're allowed to move light units in and out of those kind of theater boxes where they can do the raiding. You can play your ops event, and then, and this is kind of weird, if you activated a unit, you can spend to do a besieging action. So you can activate a unit that's already sieging to get a die roll out of it, or otherwise to start a siege. And then you're allowed to do this kind of admin march with a minor force, which is like 5 or less strength points, and have that do something on its own, and that's just kind of free. Then you get a free siege segment, where if you're already besieging, you get to roll, and you don't have to pay a supply for that as far as I can tell. And then you go to a rally and resupply segment. Now the rally and resupply segment kind of negates, there's a lot of cards that screw aside, well not a lot, but a few, that screw aside supplies up that you play at the beginning of their turn, and unless they really decide to do something, even though they're in bad supply situation, they're pretty much recovered by your turn. So you don't, there's no way of using those cards to hit somebody when they're out, when they're low on supply, unless they allow it. So summer and fall each are a set of 5 cards each, and there's a draw phase before each one. Then we go to winter. People pull back to their winter quarters, and everybody's allowed a winter strategy play. They draw a card and can then play a card, and that's limited. There's very few, you can't do actions during those unless you have a winter actions card. And then we go to the diplomatic choices. Now, big thoughts about this. So, I want to compare this kind of to 2 things that I think it's fairly similar to in some ways. One is, of course, the original Freddy the Great, and this blows it out of the water. I never, at least in my opinion, I never liked the original Freddy the Great. Everybody, it attained this classic status, and maybe it was the first at certain things. I'm not quite sure what, because Third Reich beat it to most of those things. But it had kind of reaction movement. I think it may have been one of the first games to do that. But it was lacking a campaign game, and this has a campaign game. Actually, it has several, as well as one-year scenarios. Now, again, the campaign game, maybe that existed in the original SPI version. I know a broken version showed up in the Decision Games version. I have the Avalon Hill version, and it certainly doesn't exist there. I already talked about the small decks and how they're a pain in the butt. The other game I wanted to compare to was Napoleonic Wars, which I just played recently. That's another, I think it's either 4 or 5 player game, CDG format, has kind of the 2 sides balance. But this does not have the diplomacy that has. And this is much more of a real war game. That is more on the Here I Stand model, where, you know, counters are just troops. Now that's the same here, but everything's a lot more abstracted in it. And I feel like Here I Stand does a good job on that. Napoleonic Wars is a little lower on that. This one is aiming to be more of a war game, and I wouldn't necessarily suggest that, unless you're looking for something heavier, that you could just move from, say, Napoleonic Wars to this. But there's similarities in the way they work. During your player turn, I already kind of went through the sequence of play. During each person's player turn, there's a lot of little things you got to do. So that's a little different from a lot of the CGs. A lot of them are like, I play a card, I take care of the card, boom, I'm done. Here, there's a lot of little maintenance tasks that may or may not be your thing. And like I said, this feels more like a war game than any other CDG I've played. I have For the People queued up. That looks like it may be kind of heavier that way. I haven't gotten Empire of the Sun yet. I want to definitely take a look at that, because I think Pacific Naval Theater is actually really well suited to this design choice. So I think this is a pretty good game. I think I was very, very happily surprised with how it went after I started playing. I had some definite trouble with the rules. Part of that's not reading the cards beforehand. Part of it is they're not well organized. Even when I know them all, I'm still not absolutely certain I've got them right. And I'm not absolutely... I definitely have difficulty finding the rule I want within the rule book. I think it's worth the struggle. You know, there was a high curve to getting to, hey, I got some idea what this game is actually about. I made a lot of tactical and strategic mistakes in playing, as well as a decent number of rules mistakes. And that's to be expected in all cases, I think, with me. This is the first game I played in a while. Well, High Frontier to some extent. That my feeling is, I think I'd enjoy it a little more with actual live opponents. Speaking of live opponents, I'm not sure what I'm going to be playing next here, but I'm actually supposed to go play a game with a real live opponent. There's a monthly get-together at UAT here, and well, we'll see how that goes, and maybe I'll get some light Euro-style stuff in too. The game's supposed to take probably around 6 hours, so it's a full day, so I should be able to get something else in if I want. Anyway, cheers.